class, we will be studying about the physiology of gastric acid secretion. Physiology of gastric acid secretion. And today we will be starting physiology of gastric acid secretion, its composition, function, and control. Right? So I think we'll be able to finish gastric secretion only today. Mechanism of gastric acid secretion up to composition and mechanism of gastric acid secretion we'll be able to finish today, and rest of the things we'll do later on. Okay, so this is the anatomy of stomach. After the time has come to the esophagus, there is the relaxation of the stomach so that food can be stored in the stomach. Okay, so that the food can be stored in the stomach. So you have to know about the parts of the stomach. So this part is the cardiac part, this one is the fundus, this one is the antrum, and this one is the pylorus. Okay, so there are mainly, you can mainly tell that there are three parts of the stomach, right? Anatomically there are many, but physiologically three parts are important. Okay, cardiac or fundic part, antrum, and pylorus. Okay, three parts are important physiologically because these areas, these part consist of the glands and they secrete the juice. Okay, they secrete the gastric juice. There is the cardiac part or the fundus, then there is the antrum, and there is the pylorus. So for the secretion of please all of you mute your mic. So for secretion of the gastric contents from the intestine, from the stomach, there are three phases. Okay, there are three phases for secretion of the gastric juice. First phase is the cephalic phase. Okay, first phase is the cephalic phase, second phase is the gastric phase, and third phase is the intestinal phase. Cephalic phase, gastric phase, and intestinal phase. Okay, so during the cephalic phase, there is the secretion of the gastric juice in the stomach. Okay, during the cephalic phase, there is the secretion of gastric juice in the stomach. So when you hear about the food, when there is the presence of food in the mouth, and when you smell about the food, there is the secretion of gastric juice in the stomach. Then during the gastric phase, once the food reaches into the stomach, due to the mechanical irritation of the food, due to the chemicals present in the food, there are the secretion of the gastrointestinal juices. Okay, once food reaches into the stomach, there are the vagal reflexes, and there are different hormones acting, which causes secretion of gastric juice. Then the intestinal phases, due to the nervous and the hormonal mechanism, the gastric juices are secreted and inhibited. Okay, gastric juice are secreted or inhibited. So mainly there are three phases of gastrointestinal secretion. One is the cephalic phase. During cephalic phase, due to the smell, okay, due to the sight of the food, due to the smell of the food, due to the thought of the food, due to the taste of the food, there is secretion in the stomach. Okay, gastric juice is secreted. During the gastric phase, due to the mechanical irritation of the food, due to the chemicals present in the food, and due to the vagal reflexes, due to the hormones, there is secretion in the stomach. And in the intestinal phase, due to nervous mechanism and due to hormonal mechanism, the gastric juice is secreted or inhibited. Okay, the gastric juice is secreted or inhibited. So what actually does the stomach do? Okay, what actually does the stomach do? So main function of the stomach is it stores the incoming food. Then it helps in the digestion of food into the chyme. Okay, it helps in storage of the food. It helps in digestion of the food into the chyme. Okay, it helps in digestion of food into the chyme, and it helps in protection of the gastric mucosa. Okay, it helps in protection of the gastric mucosa. So it helps in mainly the storage of the food. It helps in digestion of food into the chyme. Due to the action of the gastric juice, there is the mechanical digestion of the food. The food particles, they are broken down into the smaller pieces or smaller units, and there is the protection. Okay, so the acidic gastric environment, it acidic gastric environment which is there, that is protected. Okay, so the slide is clear
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
and my sound is audible. So it helps in protection of the gastric lumen. Okay, gastric lumen, because the acid that is secreted from the stomach, it may cause auto digestion of the stomach itself. Okay, the acid, it is the high pH. Okay, it is the high pH, that means the pH is around 1, right? pH is 1. So that high acidic environment, it may auto digest the stomach itself, but there is no auto digestion of the stomach. Okay, so stomach also helps in protection. It helps in sterilizing the food. Okay, it helps in sterilizing the food also. So the mucus produced from the stomach, it helps in self protection, right? It helps in self protection. So during the gastric phase, there is the storage of the incoming food. Okay. So when the bolus of the food, it is in the esophagus, there is the receptive relaxation of the stomach, because the peristaltic waves of the esophagus is passed on to the stomach. Okay, peristaltic wave of the esophagus is passed on to the stomach, due to which there is the relaxation of the stomach. Okay, there is the relaxation of the stomach. And it also helps in controlling the movement into the duodenum. Okay, it also helps in controlling the movement into the duodenum, controlling the movement of the chyme into the duodenum. Once the bolus of the food is formed, bolus of the food, it goes to the pharynx. From the pharynx, it goes to the esophagus. From the esophagus, the bolus of the food, it reaches to the stomach. Okay. By the time the bolus of the food reaches to the stomach, there is already the receptive relaxation of the stomach. Okay, because the peristaltic waves generated in the esophagus is passed on to the stomach, and there is the receptive relaxation, and food reaches into the stomach. Once food reaches into the stomach, there is the conversion of the bolus of the food into the chyme. Okay, there is the mechanical digestion, there is the motility of the stomach, which converts the bolus of the food into the chyme. Then once chyme is formed, okay, chyme is the semi-solid or semi-liquid particle, right? It is the semi-liquid particle. So that semi-liquid particle is slowly directed to the duodenum. Okay, semi digested particle, chyme, semi liquid particle chyme, it is slowly directed to the duodenum. So so storage becomes important when more food than the required enters the stomach. Okay? More food than required enters the stomach. Too much in the into the duodenum will spill the colonic diaster. Okay? Then second phase is the digestion phase. Okay, digestion of food into the chyme. So once the bolus of the food, it enters into the stomach, due to the action of the salivary amylase, there is the digestion occurs. Okay, and other secretions from the gastric glands. Okay, by other secretions from the gastric glands also causes the digestion of the food, right? Other secretions from the stomach also causes digestion of the food. So there are different cells in the stomach. Okay, there are different cells in the stomach, and these cells they secrete the they secrete the gastric juice, and these gastric juice helps in digestion of the food. Right? So, for example, parietal cells, it helps in secretion of the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Okay, parietal cells are present in the stomach, which helps in secretion of hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. So, hydrochloric acid, it is dissociated into the hydrogen and chloride. So, HCl, it helps in stabilizing action of the food. Then intrinsic factor, it is required for absorption of vitamin B12. Okay, intrinsic factor is required for absorption of vitamin B12. Then there are chief cells. Okay, chief cells are present, or peptic cells are present. Peptic cells secrete the pepsinogen and gastric acid and gastric lipase. Okay, chief cells secrete the pepsinogen and gastric lipase. So this pepsinogen helps in breakdown of the proteins. Okay, pepsinogen is converted into pepsin by the action of hydrochloric acid. Okay, for conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin, hydrochloric acid is necessary. So when pepsinogen secretes the when pepsinogen is converted into pepsin, pepsin helps in um, breakdown of the proteins. Okay, then there are the gastric lipases, which helps in the breakdown of the lipids, right? So in the stomach, due to the action of the salivary amylase, there is the digestion process going on. Due to the protein digestion is also occurring because of the pepsin, and the lipid digestion also occurs due to the action of the lipase. Okay. So pepsinogen is converted to the pepsin by the action of hydrogen ion. So pepsin is an endopeptidase, and it cleaves the peptides. Okay, it cleaves the peptides. So there are also mucous neck cells, which helps in secretion of mucus. Okay, so that food food can be easily taken to the uh, food can be easily mixed, and it can be easily lubricated. Okay, mucous neck cells, which secretes the mucus, and it helps in lubrication of the food particles, as well as it helps in protection. Okay, there are mucus which helps in protection. So it helps in secretion of the bicarbonate for protection also. It secretes mucus for protection, and it secretes bicarbonate for protection. And there are enterochromaffin like cells. Okay, there are enterochromaffin like cells which helps in secretion of the histamine. Okay, enterochromaffin like cells are present which helps in secretion of histamine. Once histamine is secreted, it helps in more secretion of the gastric juice from the parietal cells. Okay, and there are somatostatin cells, D cells. So D cells, it helps in inhibiting the secretion of the gastric juice. It inhibits the enterochromaffin cells, and it inhibits the parietal cells, and it inhibits the pepsin cells, mucus cells, all. Okay, D cells or somatostatin cells. Somatostatin, it helps in inhibition of secretion of all types of the glands. Okay, it helps in inhibition of the parietal cells, it helps in inhibition of the chip cells, it helps in inhibition of the mucous neck cells and enterochromaffin cells. So these cells secrete somatostatin when pH drops to inhibit further parietal cell secretion. And there are G cells, gastrin cells. So gastrin cells are also present. So gastrin cells also helps in the secretion of the gastric juice. It acts on the parietal cells, and it causes secretion of the gastric juice. Gastric G cells or gastrin cells, they help in secretion, stimulating the parietal cells. It also helps in relaxation of ileocecal sphincter. Okay, it increases the pyloric sphincter activity, and it also helps in lowering the stomach motility. So these are the cells. So this is the gastric gland. Okay, this is the gastric gland. So in the gastric gland, there are mucous neck cells. Okay, these are the mucous neck cells. These are the parietal cells. These are the enterochromaffin-like cells. These are the chief cells. This is the D cells, and this is the G cells. Okay, right. So mucous neck cells, it helps in secretion of the mucus and bicarbonate. Okay, it helps in secretion of mucus and bicarbonate. So mucus and bicarbonate, they form the gastric mucosal barrier. Okay, mucous neck cells helps in secretion of mucus and bicarbonate, so it helps in formation of the gastric mucosal barrier. Once gastric mucosal barrier is formed, the stomach cannot be auto digested. Okay, right? Because the high pH of the gastric juice is buffered by the bicarbonate. Okay, high pH of the gastric juice is buffered by the bicarbonate. And there are parietal cells. Parietal cells secrete the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factors. So hydrochloric acid, function of the hydrochloric acid is it helps in killing the bacteria. It has the sterilization action, as well as it helps in activation of the pepsinogen into pepsin. Okay, it helps in activation of pepsinogen into pepsin. There are the intrinsic factors which are secreted by the parietal cells. Okay, intrinsic factors secreted by the parietal cells. Intrinsic factors is necessary for absorption of vitamin B12. Okay, intrinsic factor is necessary for absorption of vitamin B12, because there are receptors of intrinsic factors in the small intestine. Only vitamin B12, if there is no intrinsic factor and we are consuming the vitamin B12, then vitamin B12 cannot be absorbed. Okay, vitamin B12 must bind with the intrinsic factor, and intrinsic, after forming complex with the intrinsic factor, then only there is the absorption of the vitamin B12, because the receptor for the intrinsic factor is present in the small intestine. Okay, there is no vitamin B12 receptor in the small intestine. There is intrinsic factor receptor in the small intestine. Once vitamin B12 binds with the intrinsic factor, then only there is absorption. Then there are enterochromaffin-like cells. So if class time is finished, then you can join with the same ID and password. Okay, you join with the same ID and password. And if class time finishes, join with same ID and password. Then there are enterochromaffin-like cells. Enterochromaffin-like cells secrete the histamine. Okay, so histamine, it acts on the parietal cells to cause gastric juice secretion. There are chief cells. Chief cells secrete the pepsinogen and gastric lipase. Pepsinogen, it digests the protein, and gastric lipase, it digests the fats. Okay, pepsinogen, it is converted into pepsin by high acid. Okay, right? Pepsinogen is converted into the pepsin by the acid present in the stomach. Then there are G cells, D cells. So D cells is the somatostatin cells. So if there is more acid in the stomach, then it inhibits the gastric secretion, gastric juice secretion. Okay, if there is more acid, then it inhibits the gastric juice secretion. And there are G cells, gastrin cells. G cells, they also stimulate the gastric secretion. They also stimulate the parietal cells to cause secretion. So the parietal cells, they are present in the body. Okay, they are present in the body. Chief cells, they are present in the body. G cells or the gastrin cells, they are present in the antrum, and mucus cells, they are present in the antrum. Okay, so parietal cells secrete the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Chief cells secrete the pepsinogen. Okay, chief cells secrete the pepsinogen and gastric lipase. G cells secrete the gastrin, and mucus cells secrete the mucus and bicarbonate and pepsinogen. Okay, so for stimulation of the parietal cells, gastrin can cause stimulation of the parietal cells. Vagal stimulation. Okay, vagal stimulation by releasing the acetylcholine causes parietal secretion, parietal cell secretion, and histamine secretion. Histamine causes the parietal cell secretion. Okay, so among these three, gastrin, vagal, and histamine, histamine has the potent effect on parietal cell secretion. Only histamine stimulation, okay, at cell stimulation only can cause more secretion of the parietal cell. It have the potent effect on parietal cell secretion. The chief cells, they secrete the pepsinogen and pepsinogen in response to vagal stimulation. Okay, chief cells secrete the pepsinogen in response to the vagal stimulation. Gastrin or G cells. G cells secrete the gastrin by vagal stimulation, but the vagus that supplies the G cells, they release the gastrin releasing peptide. Okay, the vagus that supplies the G cell, that releases the gastrin releasing peptide, and other small peptides also causes the gastrin secretion. So it is inhibited by somatostatin and high um, hydrogen ion concentration of the stomach. Then mucous neck cells, they secrete the mucus and bicarbonate due to the stimulation of the vagus also. Okay, right? All the cells, they get stimulated mainly due to the acetylcholine secretion. All the cells, they secrete the gastric juices due to the vagal stimulation that releases the acetylcholine. Okay, except G cell, right? Except G cell, the vagus that supplies the G cell releases gastrin releasing peptide as the neurotransmitter. Right? Right? This is important for MCQs also. Right? The vagus that supplies, Shubham, तुम्हारा mic off करो. The vagus that supplies the G cell releases gastrin releasing peptide. Okay. Rest of all the cells that is innervated by the vagus releases acetylcholine. Okay. Rest of all the cells are innervated by the acetylcholine except the vagus nerve. Okay, except the vagus nerve. So here are the parietal cells. Right? Parietal cells, due to the stimulation of the due to the stimulation of the vagus nerve releases the acetylcholine. Acetylcholine acetylcholine acts on the parietal cells secrete the intrinsic factor and HCl. Vagus nerve acts on the chief cells chief cells secrete the pepsinogen. Okay, chief cells secrete the pepsinogen. The vagus nerve that supplies the chief cells, the vagus nerve that supplies the chief cells also secrete the acetylcholine. Okay, vagus nerve that supplies the chief cells also secrete the acetylcholine, and pepsinogen and gastric lipase is secreted. The vagus nerve supplies the G cells. Okay, the vagus nerve supplies the G cells. The G cells, the vagus nerve that supplies the G cells, they release the gastrin releasing peptide. Okay, then G cells releases the gastrin. The gastrin, they comes to the circulation, they goes to the blood, and from the blood it reaches to the parietal cells, and it will cause the secretion of the gastric juice. Okay, it will cause the secretion of the gastric juice, that is the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Right? So this is again the part of the stomach. This is the esophagus. This is the fundus. This is the body. This is the antrum, and this is the pyloric sphincter. So gastric glands, they are present mostly in the body and the antrum. Okay, gastric glands, they are present mostly in the antrum and the body. Right? The glands present in the fundic part and in the pyloric part, they mainly secrete the mucus and bicarbonate. Okay, the glands, those present in the fundus and those present in the pyloric part, they mainly secrete the mucus and bicarbonate. Right? But mainly active gastric glands, they are present in the body and the antrum. Then third phase of the gas in the gastric digestion is third function is the protection. Okay, so this is the epithelial cells. So from the from the lumen of the gland, parietal cells, they secrete the HCl. It is secreted. Okay, this is the gland. So HCl is secreted. So that HCl that may autodigest these cells. Okay, these epithelial cells, they may be autodigested, but due to the presence of the bicarbonate ion, due to the presence of the tight junction, due to the presence of the mucus, and due to the presence of the trefoil peptide. Okay, trefoil peptide is there in here. Okay, so these causes the protection of the lumen of this causes the protection of the epithelial cells, right? So there is the prevention of autodigestion of the stomach. Okay, because there is the high pH of the gastric juice, right? There is the high pH of the gastric juice. So if this high pH, it enters here, if it acts here, then acts on the epithelial cells, it will cause the digestion of the autodigestion of the stomach, right? Autodigestion of the stomach. But there is no autodigestion of the stomach because there is the presence of gastric mucosal barrier. Okay, there is the bicarbonate, there is the mucus, and there are the trefoil peptide, and there are the tight junction, which helps in prevention of autodigestion of the stomach. But if but if there is some pathological condition, okay, if some bacteria invest there, then the gastric mucosal barrier is lost. Okay, this physical barrier is lost. Once this physical barrier is lost, then this high pH juice, okay, the gastric juice which is of high pH, they will cause digestion of the stomach. Okay, and they will cause ulcer, peptic ulcer, right? So if due to some mechanism the gastric mucosal barrier is lost, then it will cause autodigestion of the stomach. Okay, it will cause autodigestion of the stomach. So look at the pH of the juice, right? Look at the pH of the pH at the lumen and at the surface. The pH at the lumen of the stomach, it is 2, whereas the pH at the surface of the cells, it is 7. Okay, it is alkaline pH and it is highly acidic pH. Right? In the lumen, the pH is highly acidic, whereas in the cell surface, the pH is alkaline. Okay, so protection against the acidic environment, mucus provides the cell protection. So you can shortly go again through this. Whenever there is food, okay, whenever there is food or presence of food in the stomach or due to the cephalic phase, there is the stimulation of the enteric nervous system, there is the stimulation of the G cells. Okay, there is the stimulation of the G cells, there is the stimulation of the parietal cells. So stimulation of the G cells and parietal cells will cause the hydrochloric acid secretion, and it will also stimulate the chief cells also. Chief cells will also secrete the pepsinogen and pepsin, right? So if hydrochloric acid is more, okay, if hydrochloric acid is more secreted, then hydrochloric acid will itself stimulate the D cells, and when D cells are stimulated, D cell will release the somatostatin. Somatostatin will inhibit histamine secreting enterochromaffin like cells, it will inhibit the parietal cells, and it will inhibit the gastrin cells. Okay, it will inhibit the gastrin cells. So this vagus nerve, that vagus nerve is supplying all. Look at this. Hey, vagus nerve is stimulating the G cells, it is stimulating the parietal cells, it is stimulating the enterochromaffin like cells. So vagus nerve that supplies the parietal cells and ECL cells will secrete the acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. Okay, vagus nerve that innervates the parietal cells and ECL cells will secrete acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter, whereas the gastrin cells, okay, vagus nerve that supplies the G cells, it releases gastrin releasing peptide as the neurotransmitter. Okay, among the three, G cell, ECL cell, and parietal cell, the potency of secretion of the hydrochloric acid is mostly from the ECL cell that secretes the histamine. Okay, histamine has more potent action. Okay, remember this. You have to remember this, right? Histamine has more potent action in secretion of the hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells. Right? Alone, histamine alone can cause more secretion of the gastric juice. So in the stomach, there are three types of the gland. You know, there are three types of the gland: cardiac gland, Pondy gland, and pyloric gland. I have already told. Right? Mainly, it can be divided into three. So one is the cardiac or antral glands. You know, cardiac glands. So cardiac glands, they are small in number, situated at the cardiac end, and they mainly secrete the mucus. And the pyloric gland, they also mainly secrete the mucus. Okay, cardiac gland and pyloric gland, they secrete the mucus. Right? Then Pondy gland, they secrete the gastric juice. Okay, Pondy gland or Ogdentic gland, they secrete the gastric juice. So this you do not need, right? So this is the cells. Right? This is the cardiac part. You know, this is the cardiac part. This is the pyloric part. You know, so main gland are present here. Like gastric glands mainly secreted hydrochloric acid is mainly secreted from the oxyntic glands present mainly at the body. So there are different types of the cells in the gastric. Okay, it forms the pit like this. Okay, there are the invaginations. There are the invaginations. So these upper one, they are the epithelial cells. Okay, these are the epithelial cells. Below that there are the mucous neck cells. Below that, there are the stem progenitor cells, and there are parietal cells. There are chief cells. Okay, there are parietal cells, chief cells are present. Right? So gastric juice. So the color of the gastric, the characteristic of the gastric juice, it is no color. It is clear. Okay, it is clear, colorless. Right? Gastric juice is colorless. It is clear. The pH, it is 0.8 to 1.5. That means it is highly acidic. Okay, pH is highly acidic. Right? pH is highly acidic, and normal rate of secretion of the gastric juice, it is about 2.5 liters per day. Right? It is about 2.5 liters per day. Gastric juice is secreted. So composition of the gastric juice is, it contains the sodium, it contains the potassium, it contains the magnesium, it contains hydrogen. Okay, it contains different anions such as chloride, phosphate, sulfate. Okay, it consists the pepsin, it consists of the lipases, it consists of the mucus, and it consists of the intrinsic factors. Okay, it consists of the intrinsic factors. These are the contents of the gastric juice. So this is also the same composition of the gastric juice. It consists of the hydrochloric acid. Mainly we have to focus on the enzyme components. Okay, so mainly it consists of the hydrochloric acid. It consists of the pepsinogen. It consists of the gastric lipase. It consists of the mucus, and it consists of the intrinsic factor. It consists of the intrinsic factors. So hydrochloric acid, what it does, it have the bactericidal action. Okay, it have the bactericidal action. Then pepsinogen, it helps in cleaving the proteins. Okay, it helps in digestion of the proteins. Right? It helps in conversion of the proteins into the peptides and dipeptides. Then there are the mucus. Mucus helps in lubrication of the food, and it also helps in uh, forming the chyme. Right? Then there are intrinsic factors. Intrinsic factors, it helps in absorption of the vitamin B12. Okay, intrinsic factors, it helps in absorption of the vitamin B12. And there are gastric lipases, which helps in the digestion of the proteins. So this is the structure of the gastric gland. Right? This is the structure of the gastric gland. So these are the surface mucous cells or epithelial cells. So these surface mucous cells or epithelial cells, they secrete the mucus, they secrete the bicarbonate, and they secrete the trefoil peptide. Okay. In exam, it is mostly asked why stomach is not auto-digested. Okay, in exam, it is mostly asked why stomach is not auto-digested. Right? In that question, you have to write, because the surface mucous cells of the stomach, they secrete the mucus, bicarbonate, and trefoil peptide. Okay, due to which the mucus layer, okay, due to which the mucus layer, it have the alkaline pH. Okay, mucus layer here, it have the alkaline pH in comparison to the lumen of the stomach. Okay, in comparison to the lumen of the stomach, the mucus layer have the alkaline pH due to the secretion of the mucus, bicarbonate, trefoil peptide, and tight junction between the epithelial cells helps in prevention of the autodigestion of the stomach. Okay, it helps in prevention of the autodigestion of the stomach. So these mucous neck cells, they help in they act as the stem cells. Okay, because after 2-3 days, after some days, these mucous neck cells, they are constantly replaced. Okay, the mucous neck cells, they are constantly replaced. Mucous cells are constantly replaced, and these mucous neck cells helps in regeneration of the other cells. Okay, other cells. Then there are the parietal cells, right? Parietal cells secrete the intrinsic factor and hydrochloric acid. Then there are histamine cells. Okay, histamine cells, enterochromaffin-like cells. It helps in secretion of the histamine. There are the chip cells, which helps in secretion of the pepsinogen and gastric lipase. So, hydrochloric acid, it is secreted from which gland? Hydrochloric acid, anyone can answer. Hydrochloric acid is secreted from the parietal cells. Okay, hydrochloric acid is secreted from the parietal cells. So this much for today.